because I knew he was out there. I knew he was still alive, and I knew he was close, or at least I knew he was in the state. And I was just so unnerved by him.
Keep watching to learn more.
Book 3 in the new Thinking Aloud dialogue series is UFOs and UAP, Are We Really Alone? Now available on Amazon.
New Thinking Aloud is presented by the California Institute for Human Science, a fully accredited university offering distant learning graduate degrees that focus on mind, body, and spirit. The topics that we cover here. We are particularly excited to announce new degrees emphasizing parapsychology and the paranormal. Visit their website at cihs.edu. You can now download all 8 copies of the New Thinking Aloud magazine for free, or order beautiful printed copies. Go to newthinkingaloud.org.
Thinking Aloud. Conversations on the leading edge of knowledge and discovery with psychologist Jeffrey Mishlove.
Hi, I'm Dr. Deborah Lynn Katz, and I'm a guest host on New Thinking Aloud, produced by Dr. Jeffrey Mishlove. Today, I have the privilege of interviewing none other than Pam Coronado. Pam is one of the leading psychic detectives in the world. She's also a highly accomplished remote viewer. We both served together on the International Remote Viewing Association's board, and we have both served as presidents of IRVA as well. Pam is an accomplished remote viewing instructor, and she also has been featured on A&E's Sensing Murder. She was basically the star of that show, and she's been on many other television shows, including Oprah. Pam and I will be talking today about the ins and outs, the highs and lows, and what it really takes to be a psychic detective. Let's get started. Hi, Pam. I'd like to welcome you to the show. This is incredible that you had some time to meet with me tonight.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me.
I was thinking a lot of people are familiar with your work, but for those who aren't, can you just summarize how you first got into detective work?
So most people know me as a psychic detective because of my career out there, kind of pretty much in the public. But how it started for me was a dream. And at the time I had this dream, I didn't think of myself as psychic at all. I had 3 young kids and I was married and normal. Then I started having all these nightmares. And then I had this one particular dream, and I dreamed that I was in the backseat of a car and that the people driving the car were getting ready to murder me. And the man in the front seat turned around and he glared at me. And I knew in the dream that he was my husband, but I'd never seen this person before in my life. But in the dream, I knew he was my husband, and I knew the woman was his mistress, and I knew they were going to kill me. And I had that dream, and it was really so intense that when I woke up, I was just like, what was that? And I journaled it. And then about 3 days later, I was looking in the newspaper. We still had newspapers at the time. And I just was shocked because there was a picture of the man in my dream, and the headline, and him and his girlfriend, and the headline said that his wife was missing and that him and the girlfriend were the prime suspects.
What did you do at that point?
I freaked out. I freaked out because I was like, this was the first time I couldn't dismiss something as just being coincidence.
Yeah.
And I didn't tell anybody. I didn't tell anybody because I just thought I was losing it. I didn't know what to do. And so I started following the case obsessively. And then one day it was on the news, and the mother and the grandmother were on the news, and they were crying, and they were saying, if anybody can help us, if you know anything that can help us find her, please come forward. And so I was just like, okay, I have to say something, because in the dream, I saw the car and I saw where they were driving. I saw this road, and I saw a lot of those details. And so I kind of knew where we were, or had a good idea of where we were. So I went ahead and I went down to the search party. They were having a big search party every single weekend, like 200 people gathered. So I just went ahead and went down and I gathered, I found somebody in charge. So embarrassed. I didn't want to say anything. And then turns out it was somebody I knew, somebody I'd gone to high school with. And
Hey, really?
I got really lucky because I was like, okay, you know me, I'm not crazy. And I had this dream. I'm not a psychic or anything. I don't know what's happening, but I had this dream and this is what it was. And then they asked if I would stay and help with the search. And the day turned into the most crazy day of my life. And ended up coming face to face with the guy, the killer guy, and working with the police and going on all these searches. And I was thinking, how am I in the woods looking for a body right now? Like, how is this happening? And then, of course, we found her. And I just thought that that was a fluke and that was just a weird day in my life and that I could go back to normal after that. And then people started calling me because it got out in the news. So people started calling me and asking me to help them with their case. And I didn't know what to do. I was like, if I didn't dream about your person, I don't know what to do. I want to help you. I just don't know how. And so I started doing some research and I talked to this psychic, an area psychic, and she somehow got me to look up dream experts, and I looked up Alan Vaughn, and I ended up reaching out to Alan Vaughn and made a good connection with him. He really took me under his wing and became a mentor to help me understand all the dreams that I was having. And then he introduced me to Bevy Jagers, and then Bevy Jagers introduced me to Irva and remote viewing and all of that. So that's kind of how it progressed.
Wow, that is quite a story. And have you thought back to the fact that you knew was it the law enforcement agent, the investigator on the case? I just wonder, is that the whole reason you had the dream in this case? Because there's so many other cases. So why did you have the dream about this case as opposed to all others? And that's not just a coincidence that you knew that person, right?
Well, it's even more so because she was somebody I went to high school with. I didn't know her well, but I knew who she was. And so that might have been part of it too, is because it was such a big deal in my town and it was people that I kind of knew and things like that. And so that might have been why. But yeah, if it hadn't been that particular guy that was running the search party, I don't know if I would have been brave enough to tell him what happened. And he was so welcoming and he didn't make me feel dumb and everything like that. So that
Yeah.
probably, there could be something to that.
Yeah. One of the things I want to talk about tonight is just dealing with law enforcement and the discomfort when you first are talking about what you're getting and the difference between when you just unsolicited offer information versus when you are invited. And I know you've been now invited to participate in so many investigations. And I'll just say I was recently asked to do a remote viewing session for a missing boy by one of my students. I turned the information into her. She knew the woman who owned the campground where the search was taking place. And before I knew it, they were inviting me to come and talk to law enforcement. And I did go down there and I found myself talking to like 5 people from the sheriff's office and they're all standing there. And then they're like, do you want to talk to the mother? And at that point, I already had gotten clearly that it was a 2-3-year-old boy and that he was in the river, not alive. So when they said, do you want to talk to the mother? I was like, no, I don't want to talk to the mother. What am I going to tell her? But I was like, okay, I guess, because they're like, she's standing right here. So I couldn't
No,
say no. And the first thing she says to me is, please tell me you have good news. And
no,
I
yeah,
was like, I don't think I've ever been anywhere so much where I was like, I do not want to be here. I didn't know what to say. So I just didn't say anything. But then she ended up showing me around and we were able to start to talk through things and it turned out okay. And they
Yeah.
did eventually find his body in the water, which was really hard. But I thought about you several times because I was, oh my gosh, what
What
would
was that
you
say?
do in this
Yeah.
situation? So
Yeah.
yeah, can you talk about that, like the difference between unsolicited versus working with the invitation?
Yeah, after that first experience, I haven't done that again, so I don't do unsolicited anymore. It was really Bevy Jagers that taught me that. She was just like, no, you have to be invited by the family or law enforcement. And so I pretty much stick to that as much as I can. But yeah, it's tough. I do have to deal with family members a lot and law enforcement, of course. And with the family, they're so vulnerable and they're so emotional and they weigh every word you say and things like that. So I've learned over the years kind of what to say and what not to say. So for me, I always ask them what they think. That's one of the ways I lead off as I ask them, what do you think? What is your gut saying to you? You're the mother. I always say you're the mother and you have your own intuition. So, but yeah, I usually say you're the mother, you have mother's intuition. What do you think? What do you feel? And a lot of times they'll go, I feel like they're gone, or they'll say that. And then I'm a little more forthcoming and say, yeah, I'm not feeling good about it. But I try not to be the one. I really don't want to be the one to say, I don't think, they're alive unless, and a lot of times they'll corner you and they'll force, try to force an answer out of you and stuff like that. I do try to dance around it as much as I can.
Yeah. And do you think that's also because you're not positive if you're going to turn out to be correct? Like
Yeah.
if you always knew for sure you're always correct, would it be easier to just say straight out what you got?
Well, I always tell them I could be wrong. I could be wrong, and I don't want to be wrong about something this important. So I always say that to them. I'm not sure. I could be wrong. I don't want to be wrong. This is a tough situation to be in. And I just kind of tell them the truth.
Yeah, it's so hard to be the one to take away the hope, but then at the same time, you don't really want to give false
Also,
hope,
yeah.
especially if you have a really strong feeling or you've had a strong session around it. Now, I see your badges behind you, and I know, tell us about those.
Yeah, those are gifts from a lot of the departments. A lot of the departments that I work with, they thank me by giving me a department patch. So I've got more. I ran out of room, so I need to get a bigger display thing. Yeah.
Can you tell us some of the different agencies you worked with?
The biggest one, of course, the FBI. I've worked with Interpol. I've worked with small departments, really, really small departments in rural Georgia. I've worked all across the country, almost every state now. So a lot.
And how do people find you?
They find me usually on the internet, on my webpage. And, it's because I've been out there. I used to have a TV show called Sensing Murder, and everything that we did in that show was done live on camera. And, we were the first show that we didn't just reenact crimes. Like, this was the first time they actually had somebody sit down with the police and actually go through the cases on camera every week. So after that, my reputation was out there. And so a lot of times people know who I am and they know. I get a lot of people who have heard of me, or they followed my career, and then all of a sudden something happens and they know to call me or tell their friend to call me or something like that.
I've been getting all these requests lately from people who have a remote viewing task. Like one woman thought she might have siblings and wanted to know where they were, but she didn't know if she had siblings. And there seems to be this theme where people don't know if something exists, but they want me to look for it. Like, we think there's gold here, but we don't know if it really is here, or we think our grandfather buried something in the forest, but we're not sure if that's really true. And then can you find it? Do you get those cases? Because I don't know why, but that seems to be like 95% of
Wow. No, I don't get a lot of that. I don't get a lot of that. But I do get a lot of looky-loos. I know they're well intentioned, but I get a lot of looky-loo people who were like, they're just curious about a case, or they heard about it because it's in their hometown and everybody's talking about it. And so a lot of times I get the kind of curiosity, looky-loo stuff.
And can you talk about that? Because I know there's just so many people who, they hear about a case and they do get like really emotionally attached. And sometimes they are having just like yourself, where they had a dream or they're having a premonition or they did a session and they really think that they could help and they don't know what to do from there. What advice do you give to people?
Yeah, it depends on the quality of what they have, is generally the answer. If it's very, very vague, don't go forward with law enforcement. But if you have details that somebody could actually look at, then maybe. But, just saying, I see a path in the woods, detectives are going to get really irritated. They don't want 20 people calling them and telling them these things. So it really does have to do with what level of detail that they have.
Do you have the people send you their write-up of what they have so you can assess it?
Sometimes. So, and I teach, right? So I teach classes. And so over the time, my students work with me for a certain amount of time. So they kind of know when they may be ready to approach and when they're not yet. And I let them work on cases with me. So they kind of get their feet wet that way. But I always say there's a way to approach. There is a way to approach. It's not on a high profile case where they're getting thousands of unsolicited calls, because even if you were right on the money, nobody's going to know because it's going to get buried in a pile of stuff that they got. And, there's too much going on. It's just too chaotic. So stay away from high profile cases. But if somebody, has trained and they know what they're doing and they've done their CRV or they've done their psychic detective and they know what they're doing, I always tell them to approach their local cold case department and say, hey, I've been doing this training and I've been doing this work. Would you be interested in, working with me on any cold cases? Because it's a low risk situation. Nobody's watching. They got nothing going on with it. They got nothing to lose. Nobody's going to laugh at them. You know what I mean? So it's a low stakes kind of situation.
Yeah. Yeah. I know quite a few remote viewers that are working cold cases at the moment for that reason. I had a researcher refer a woman to me recently who had I think it was, I can't remember if it was dreams or waking, but she got a lot of details. But I asked her to send me her write up, what she would share with detectives. And it hadn't really even occurred to her that like she would want to put it in writing. And so it was a good thing she did. She actually had a lot of details, but mixed in was her own ideas about things, like because she had then like watched TV and seen the different suspects. So mixed in with her psychic information was all these thoughts about the different people, and it was all intertwined. And I said, like, you have to get all of that out and just purely give the intuitive information, because this is good. They're just going to toss this aside like, oh, we can't trust any of this. And she had gotten the information before she watched it all, but you couldn't tell that from reading what she wrote. So yeah. People really, they just don't know these things. So it's good.
I always tell them, it's not your job to solve the case. It's not your job. Your job is to provide the puzzle pieces, and the detective's job is to put them together. So it's not your job. And you're going to be less accurate if you start injecting your own thoughts and things. So just put exactly what you saw, exactly what you heard, exactly what you felt, and don't elaborate. Put it into a nice summary form, yes, but don't elaborate and create a story or try to make it make sense or any of that stuff, because that's when you're gonna mess it up. I remember I had a detective, I'll never forget this. I got into his office. I think this was Georgia, actually. Just like Georgia or South Carolina, someplace, this real small little department. And I walked in and sat down in the sheriff's, office, and he said, everybody was talking about the case and throwing ideas around, and I jumped in there, and he said, ma'am, he says, I didn't fly you across the country to get your opinion. He goes, we've been doing that all day. I flew you across the country because I want your intuition. I was like, sorry, okay.
Oh my gosh.
But it was true, I was just like, that left a lasting impression on me, because he's like, I don't want to hear your ideas, I don't want to hear it.
And that's probably the best advice for all psychic work. Find that, when working with clients for doing readings, which I know you do as well, intuitive readings for people. And every once in a while, I try to have like a strict rule to just be in a psychic space and not go into other things. But every once in a while, I'll get activated, or I'll be like, well, look, this isn't me being psychic, but I just thought I would share this. And most of the time they're like, okay, whatever. Like, can we get back to that session?
Yeah.
They're there.
Yes. Yeah. They're like, why are you bothering me with this? Yeah.
Yeah, don't take up my time. And I'm like, oh, I'm not charging you for this time. But they're just like, yeah, that's not why we're talking to you. So it's hard though, because we have
We
brains.
have thoughts, right? We do have thoughts.
We're not like in the Minority Report where it's just, yeah, just, use us as vessels and we don't have opinions. But
True, true, true. And I do hash that out after I feel like I've done all the intuitive work I can possibly do, and I'm too hopelessly front loaded after that, then I will sit down and hash it out with them. Or a lot of times they'll take the original reading and they'll go off and they'll do their investigation or whatever, and they'll come back sometimes with questions and things like that. And I'll do another session with them. After a couple of rounds of that, I'm front loaded. I can't really do it anymore because I'm just too front loaded. And so at that point, then it becomes more of an intellectual exercise.
Can you talk about the different responses you get from law enforcement? Like, have they all been great to work with, or have there been some nightmare situations?
Oh my gosh, so many variations, because they're all human beings and they all have a personality, and every agency has different rules in the way that they deal with things. Usually the smaller the department, the easier they are to work with, because they don't have all of the red tape and so much bureaucracy, that you have to go through in a bigger department. In a bigger department, they have to run everything up to the top a lot of times. Smaller departments, I found small departments are more grateful a lot of times, because they know they need the help. They know they're kind of in over their head sometimes, and they actually appreciate it more than some of the bigger urban sort of departments who have more ego stuff going on. But I have some detectives that, we're best of friends. We're still friends. 20 years later, we're still friends. When I get into town with them, I go have lunch or I meet up with them. And then there's others that, I talk to them once, never hear from them again, have no idea if they used it, didn't use it, if it helped, no idea. And then there's some who are just downright, not friendly, not open-minded.
And so is it that sometimes you're brought in by an officer, but then it's the rest of the team that you might have some challenges with?
No, a lot of times the family will insist on it. So they're humoring the family. And so a lot of times the family will demand that they hire me.
Really?
And so they feel like they don't have a choice. And so sometimes those detectives are, super open minded. I try really hard to win those people over, though. I try to, I try to give them enough information that all of a sudden they go, wait a minute, maybe this is worth listening to.
Can you give some examples, like maybe your top 3 examples of cases that you worked on and were able to provide details that then you received feedback that was useful to solve the case?
I never take credit for solving a case, but I do have cases that I have found people. I have found people. Right now, just last week, we had one that I'm excited about. I haven't checked in to see that the detective was swamped, but the family had asked me to work on this case where the husband had murdered his wife and took off. He murdered her, left her there in the house, and I think they had 4 children, and then he went missing. So they assumed he killed himself or something, like just went into the woods and killed himself. When I did the reading, I was like, nope, he's out walking around. He faked his own death. He's alive. They go, what? And then I told him how I can't say it out loud, I don't think, but I told him how he got away, like the route he took, and they were able to confirm that because they knew where they had found his vehicle, and it lined up with what I had told them. And so they started going, she might be right. Like, what if he is out there? So they put him out on America's Most Wanted last week.
Wow.
And so I guess I was like, how's it going? We're getting swamped. So that was one because that was very recent. So I was excited about that.
That's really cool.
Yeah. And a lot of times, I have a funny story. It's talk about my dead or alive issue. So I had a case where a guy was missing. This was local here. He was missing and he had been in jail. He got out of jail and they didn't know if he was okay or not because he kind of went missing. He didn't go home. And I guess he had said he was afraid to go home because he was afraid of his relatives or something. So I set to describing where he was. Only I, in my mind, thought he was dead. I thought he was like killed himself. I thought he was suicidal. But I told him what street to walk down and where to turn and where to go, and that he was back there by these railroad tracks. So they followed the tracks, they followed the trail and did exactly what I said. And they got back there and they said, so he's sitting on the railroad tracks eating an apple and he's alive.
Oh my gosh. So they found him where you brought them
Well, they
to.
found him where I told him, but he was alive. So I was like, glad to be wrong, glad to be wrong, but still.
Do you find that this is difficult, being able to tell if someone's alive or dead? What are the
It's the
challenges?
age-old problem. It is really the age-old problem. I've never kept somebody alive that was not alive. I've never kept somebody alive that was not alive. But I have killed off people that weren't. So normally, if they're alive, every time I look at them, I see them in a different scenario and they're moving around and they're doing things. It's obvious to me after a few days that they're on the move and they're alive. But um, but certainly I've messed up the other way where I thought somebody was not alive and they were.
Are you going after looking for their body and tuning into the state of the body, or are you connecting with their consciousness? The state of the body, I mean, half the time a person's asleep, like they
Right, they're laying
that
down.
when they're asleep. And then also maybe sometimes some people's minds, they're not very alive in their minds. What do you think the problem is? Because you're not the only.
The problem, yeah, it's a big problem. I stay focused on the body. I stay focused on the physical. Because if you focus on the spirit, it's really, really confusing, especially for the mediums out there. Mediums are going to be really massively confused. You would think it'd be easy for a medium. It's actually harder for them. because you may have like their higher self or something and their consciousness, and you think that you're talking to their spirit out of their body. It's really confusing. So I just stay focused on the body. Like it's the body is the target. The body's my target, and I just do it as if I'm going for the target.
Yeah, that I discovered the hard way that was usually the best way to do it because I had a case years ago where a father, his daughter was missing in Southern California near where I lived. And I kept tuning into her and her consciousness seemed so lively. Like she actually seemed happy. And I thought that she must be alive because she was so communicative. And even when I wasn't trying to tune in, like I would start to hear her voice talking. And of course, now I realize that's a sign that they're not alive because live people, especially if they don't know you, they wouldn't usually just start, talking to you like that telepathically unless there was a reason they wanted to get in touch with you. So it's almost the opposite. Like dead people seem more alive. Like, do you pretty much find that?
Hmm. Yeah, they can be very chatty or, engaging that way. And I had another funny story because I used to tell people, if they're super happy, it doesn't mean they're dead, but, a lot of times if somebody's sad or in pain or angry or frustrated, they're probably in their body having a human day, right? I'm like, yeah, they're frustrated, they're crying, they're having a human experience. So I gave a practice person, and it was actually John Cook's wife.
I know.
They had just gotten engaged. So they had just gotten engaged, and I gave her as the target, and everybody killed her off because she was so happy.
Oh no. I'm sure she was amused by that when she
I
heard.
told her that story. I was like, we had a big laugh over it, and John said, "Could you check again? Is she still that happy?"
That is really funny. Yeah, it does say something about the human condition that
It just
more miserable when they're alive. But in these cases too, like the person isn't going to just be having an average day if they're alive, right? Like in these cases, something's happened so that they've disappeared. It's unusual. So although that being said, they could be happy that they finally got away from whoever they're trying to run away if that's the case, which sometimes that's why people go missing and they finally feel like they're free. They may not be dead.
That's true. That's true. And I do a lot of fugitive stuff. It's terrible to, I don't know. I'm better at finding live people than deceased people. I think it's easier to find live people myself. People think that's weird because they're moving, but the fact that they're moving, they're interacting with the world in ways. They're going to get food and they're doing this and they're doing that. And they're not just buried in the woods somewhere in the middle of nowhere. So I think people who are alive and on the move are actually easier for me. Over the years, I've just learned they're easier for me.
That makes sense because, yeah, they're moving, they're doing things, they're in places you can describe. And also, it's maybe not bad news. Like it might be harder to describe things where you're going to feel like it's bad news to have to report that they're not alive. Maybe you mentioned bodies out in the forest somewhere. I'm just curious, out of all the cases you work on, how often is the body just out somewhere in the wilderness where it's hard to find versus are they somewhere that would be easy to find with landmarks around?
Almost all the time, they're in the woods with nothing. Yeah. Once in a while, I've got a case right now. It's one of the first cases I've worked in a long time where it's actually in an urban area in a building. And so we have a good idea of where that is. But most of the time it's out in the woods. There are very few landmarks. And, even if you're getting a landmark, you may not know where it is. You may be getting like a white farmhouse, or I've got a case like that right now. I've got a kind of a high profile case, and it's driving me crazy because I just can't grab onto anything that's unusual enough that I can find it or identify it. Like there's churches everywhere. The rest of it's just like farmland and stuff like that. So I'm having a really hard time with that case.
Do you think you might have a harder time if the end result in the future is that they just are not going to find the person? Like, do you think when you receive feedback in the future, retrocausally, you then might have an easier time? Or do you just think like, well, there just isn't anything distinctive around to describe?
I don't know if it's a cause and effect for me. Sometimes I do get the feeling that we're not going to find them. Sometimes I kind of know that or feel that, especially water ones. Like if somebody's in the water,
Yeah.
I'm like, I don't think we're going to be able to find them. One of the things I really am curious about is that a lot of times, we will work as hard as we can. We have searchers, drones, dogs, we have everything. We work so hard and we cannot find them. And then some turtle farmer goes out there, and finds them. And that happens a lot, like a lot, where somebody's civilian dog runs up on it, or somebody's a hunter or a fisherman, somebody, will just be out there in nature and run into it. But we are trying and trying and trying. So I don't know if the act of trying is actually pushing it away.
Yeah, that's so interesting. That was what just happened on this case with this little boy in Oregon. And well, actually, they did have a searcher who came from Mexico who specializes in diving and finding bodies in the water. And he was separate from the whole search party and all the other teams. And like about 5 days after they called off the search, he was able to find the body. Do you think that if it hadn't been for the whole big search, the random person who finds them maybe wouldn't have found them, or maybe wouldn't have known that they needed to call it in? Or I don't know if that makes
You know what I think it is? I think there's we're going to go deep for a second, but I think that there's like some sort of subconscious willingness for them to find it. You know what I mean? Because maybe there's somebody on the search that's afraid to actually find it, and they're blocking it. Or I know a lot of times for me, I don't want to. If I have a family member with me, I don't want to. And so I'm wondering sometimes if it's a subconscious thing where, for some reason we're not willing to.
Yeah. I have a friend, her, Michelle Freed. We have a podcast called Side Chicks, and she had us talk about the topic of how, I forgot what she called it, but like where you lose something and go to look for it and it's not there. And you might look for it like 5 times, and then you look for it the 6th time and you find it in the same place you looked. Do you find that happens, like even when you give people your intuitive information and they go and look and they're like, nope, you're wrong, and then they still find it there? Have you had that happen?
I haven't had that. I've had 2 weird scenarios. One, and I'll try to remember because my brain will forget. One was that I had a guy went missing. This was in Northern California. The guy went missing, and his partner, he was gay, so he had a partner, and the partner called me and said, he's been missing about 7 months, and he was super distraught. And so I just talked to him on the phone and said, this is what I see. I see this area and it's on your property. I don't know why you guys can't find him. He's right there. I was like, he's on your property. Their property was maybe 5-6 acres, but still. I'm like, he's on your property. I said, there's this little shed and, a little dry creek bed. And he goes, well, I know where you're talking about. And I said, okay. We hung up. I forgot about it. I went to the movies. I come back home and there's this message on my machine and he's crying. And he said, I went down there and I found him. He had taken pictures of it and he showed it to me and called the police, and the police didn't believe it because they had searched that area over and over and over, and they swore he wasn't there. And then they were like, all of a sudden he's there. So they didn't believe his story that he hired a psychic to find him. They became suspicious of him, so they thought he did it, and he became a suspect. It was such a mess.
Where was the body exactly?
It was exactly where I said. It was laying right on top in this dry creek bed by this thing. And the sheriff said, that's impossible. I stood in this spot. So I don't know if somebody moved him back after the search was over. Maybe, that could have
There had
happened.
been water there before or that carried him there or anything? Or
Maybe at parts of the year, but it was pretty dry.
maybe he was covered in leaves or some kind of brush at the time?
Nope, they showed me pictures and I was like, that's a skull sitting right there for the top of the surface. Yeah, so I
And
don't
how
know.
well for that guy to find it, to have been like looking. I know how horrible it is to have a loved one that you just can't find. And it's like, have you found that like people say they would rather know that they're dead than just like not know what's going on?
Yeah, always 100% of the time. Yeah.
Yeah. Our Siberian Husky was stolen and gone for 3 months. And all I did like all day long, like for hours, was drive around. And of course, I had every psychic remote viewer medium under the sun, including myself, looking for her. And in the end, she was returned. We got a phone call from the lady who had her. And she was just like, I want to give her back because she's too much for me now. I have to go have surgery. And she actually gave
Wow.
her back. But she turned out to be like where myself and many other people described her, like the lady had horses and an adult son and lived on a big property behind a gate. But I just know what that was like for her. And I kept saying, I'd rather just know she's deceased so I can stop looking, because you just feel like don't go out, for a day and you could find her, that, it's just not good. But as far as searching, I know that at some point you actually got your official detective's license and you were starting to form search capabilities yourself. Can you talk about that?
I still do. Because I was on so many searches that I went ahead and got certified as search and rescue. So I am certified for search and rescue. I actually have to get recertified. You have to get recertified every few years. I had learned how to do a search from all the early training, but I still learned some from them, NASAR and ASAR, National Association for Search and Rescue. And they have good information on different kinds of searches and how you're supposed to go about it and all of that. But I had to get certified so that I could run a search with other volunteers and people like that. So you have to learn first aid and safety and make sure nobody on your crew gets hurt and all of that. So I've done all of that. I've been doing that lately for a county that I'm sort of shocked that they don't have their own SAR team. They don't have their own SAR team. I came in on a case and to help them on a search, and they just had, the family was sort of trying to find a person to do this and a person to do that, and they didn't have any kind of organized SAR team at all, which I was sort of shocked about. So I'm hoping that I can help them get a SAR team together for future stuff.
What made you want to do that rather than just sticking to the intuitive part of it all?
Well, I've always been a hiker. I think that's part of it. So I've always been a hiker. But for me, I feel a lot of times like I'm more effective if I can be out there. I feel like I can follow their trace. Sometimes I can sort of follow their energetic scent, I guess, for back a better way to say it. So sometimes it's just more helpful for me to be out there in that way.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And then you might see things that you had picked up even visually in your sessions, right? And like recognize it and know which way to go.
Yeah, like we had a case, another case that we were successful on, and it was in my session I saw like this gully that people had discarded stuff, like illegally thrown trash down there. And I saw like half a couch and I saw some tires, and the couch stuck out to me because it had been sawed in half. And I'm like, you don't see that every day.
Yeah.
But then on the side of the road in my session, on the side of the road was this huge pile of brown beer bottles. And I was like, that's weird. Like, why would there be this huge pile of brown beer bottles that people had thrown in one spot? And why are they all brown? I don't know. I just thought it was so bizarre in my session. And when we got out there to do the search, I had narrowed it down because I give myself a landmark that's in a 2-mile radius of the person. So I was like, okay, I need a landmark within a 2-mile radius of the person. I found my landmark. It took us 3 years to find the landmark, but I found the landmark and I knew that was it. So I knew we were within 2 miles of it. And we were out driving around, and we were driving down this dirt road, and I look over and I see this big pile of brown beer bottles, and I'm like, stop the car. Get the search dog right now. And then, the dogs were out there for like 10 minutes before we had an alert out there. But I wouldn't have known if I hadn't, been out there. I don't know if they would have realized you have to stop because there's a pile of brown beer bottles.
Wow. And they actually found the body at that point. The dogs found the body. Is it usually the dogs that do find the body, or is it the people?
It's pretty hard for us if somebody's buried or somebody's been out there for a really long time. It just, with your eyes, you're probably not going to find them. So it does take dogs or drones. I work with a drone team too. So the drones can cover a lot of ground where us on foot can't do that.
Yeah.
So a lot of times the drones help too.
Do you know how many years a body could be outside and the dogs are still able to find the body?
A lot. We were on a case and the dogs were alerting. They kept alerting, and they found a grave site that nobody knew was there. And it was like from the 1800s.
Oh my gosh.
Like we had to call out the historical society and stuff.
Really?
So I think if there's bones, they can detect them.
When you get information, do you typically get whole pictures, like your description of the couch or the beer bottles? Or like many viewers, do you get bits and pieces, like colors and shapes, and not always know what it is you're looking at, or a combination?
It starts usually as bits and pieces, and then it starts to come in more clear the more I work with it. Before I took CRV training, I was just working psychically, and I didn't know that I was still getting AOLs. Like I didn't know what an AOL was, and I would get one thing and I would turn it into another thing. So I just told this class, in my class the other day, I had a case where I knew had a missing woman, and I knew that there was like a strip mall and there was like a canal behind the strip mall. And then I saw something, a guy flashed on something white, and then I flashed on something metal. This is like a typical AOL story, right? So I said, well, she must be in the canal then, because it's probably like a pipe or something. It's inside the canal. And that's my brain thinking that's what it had to be. What else could it be? Turns out they found her. I don't take any credit for that one. They found her in a field about 50 yards from the creek, from the canal. And she was in an abandoned white refrigerator.
Oh gosh.
Yeah. So the metal was there, the white was there, but my brain was like, well, it's got to be a pipe or something. Like, what else would it be?
Yeah, because you wouldn't expect it to be a refrigerator. But when after a while, I mean, that could still happen when you're more experienced, but probably now oh, I better explore this white.
Yeah.
More, even though I'm thinking it's probably a pipe, it may not be. So I need to explore it some more.
Yeah. I need to touch it and, get the shape and stuff like that. Yeah.
So CRV or controlled remote viewing, how helpful do you feel it's been for you? Because you were already quite successful. You already had your television show and done all this work before you even started to train. In fact, you and I were in a class
We
with
were in the class together, our first class. Yeah, we were.
controlled remote viewing. So yeah, how important has it been for you to have learned it, and how often are you using it versus just kind of just tuning in?
Yeah, it's very useful for me for certain situations. So for mostly for a location. So mostly for missing persons. If I have a missing person, I would prefer to sit down and do a CRV session because I feel like I'm going to get so much more detail than if I just did a quick 20-minute, sit down and look at them. So I try to, but as you know, it's time consuming. So I have to set aside the time to actually sit down and do a full session. But there's definitely been times where I had a case where we had a missing priest of all things. I had a missing priest and I just couldn't, it was like pulling teeth psychically. I just couldn't get it. I couldn't see where he was. I knew he was alive. I just couldn't get it. And then I was like, forget it. I'm just going to task it as a, CRV target. And I did it. And then I got all of this really rich information that I just couldn't get before.
Yeah, that's exactly what happens to me sometimes is I'm kind of being lazy. I think of it as like I just want to close my eyes while I'm lying down and get stuff and type on my iPhone. But if it's not like if it's just kind of vague or all over the place, sitting down with the paper and going through the structure. What was that the case that was assigned by Jimmy Aiken?
Yes.
Oh my
Yes.
gosh. Yeah, I worked on that too. It was weird. It seemed like though did you have a sense like he was kind of on the move or like going different places?
Yeah. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah. I felt like he was going to see someone in particular that he trusted.
Yeah, that was what I got actually. But
Yeah.
they had said that he had dementia, and so that was kind of
See, I'm like, I did not get dementia with him. I really didn't.
that was the thing. Like he wasn't, I mean, I don't know how a person with dementia would be out on the street, but it didn't seem like it. It did seem like like he was kind of maybe even running away or something like that.
Yes.
He was
Yeah.
like so
Yes.
well respected so, I think, gosh, it didn't even occur to me that, cause I was like, there's something wrong with what I'm getting because it's not going along with what I've been told about this very respected priest that's always lived in the same place and has dementia. Do you know, did they ever find him?
I don't know. I haven't checked because I forgot his name. You'll have to send it to me.
Yeah, I can ask too.
I forgot, but I got that same feeling that he was kind of running away from something, maybe. And then I felt like he was going towards somebody he trusted and a lot of movement and stuff. But I have dementia people a lot, a lot. I have one right now. Well,
Really?
she's wandering the streets and she's got
Oh no.
dementia and I can't find her. So I feel like I would know. I feel like I would know, you
Yeah.
know.
And you just didn't get the sense with him. Well, and how do you emotionally deal with the situation that there's just so many lost people? Like do you just feel overwhelmed with like all the requests and the need for help? How do you deal with that?
Yeah, and I just had this conversation today. It's sad, but it's like Mother's Day is literally a nightmare in my work because everybody's just on me. I get it, because it's an upsetting day. All the holidays are that way because they feel frantic for answers and stuff like that. So they're always kind of pushing. Yeah, I definitely get overwhelmed. There's times where, I have too many cases going all at one time and I feel totally overwhelmed. And I know they're getting frustrated because I'm not getting back to them in time.
Yeah, I had a dream last week where people were saying you're not getting your remote viewing sessions done on time. It can definitely can feel overwhelming.
That's why I don't do a lot of practice stuff or experiments and stuff in the community because I'm just like, I don't have time. I have so much stuff already going that I don't have time a lot of times to do stuff, the fun stuff.
Yeah, we really need a lot more remote viewers doing these cases. And I think a lot of times, because it is stressful and all that comes with it, is viewers don't want to go out and beyond like the practice or their safe zones, or they only want to work with a project manager, which of course I know you work with your students or have them sometimes help, and it's great to have that correlation and correspondence, but then you also have extra stuff to deal with, right? Because then it's like, it's one thing for you to do a session, but when you even include one more viewer or two, now it's project management and you have these decisions to make about, do I include their information if it's different from mine? And so there's still a lot there.
Thank
Yeah.
God for AI. That's all I have to say. Thank God
Yeah.
for ChatGPT.
Yeah. Have you been finding like you're using it to like do analysis, like comparing sessions and things like that?
Because I can pump in like 3 sessions and then it will just summarize the whole thing and kind of list out what the favorite perceptions were and stuff like that. So, yeah.
Yeah, I just started to do that and it's amazing. I mean, because it could take weeks if you have like 8 viewers to like just, I mean, you could do nothing else except just sit there and do an analysis with those sessions, and AI is doing it in 10 minutes.
Exactly.
Yeah,
And it's actually suggesting locations too for me sometimes. So I can say, here's my search area. I have this landmark, this landmark, this landmark. Can you give me some high probability areas? And it will do it. So even that in itself would be hours and hours of map research and stuff. And it'll spit it out in a minute or two.
Do you ever get traumatized by what you are experiencing when you go into a session to solve a case?
I haven't been traumatized a lot. Becky taught me early on that what you see can't hurt you. It's already happened. It's in the past. It can't hurt you. And that helped me, separate from that. But I was working on a case in Northern California, and then I was walking around in the crime scene and I started describing a different crime, not knowing I was doing that. And then they all stopped me and I couldn't figure out what was wrong. And it turns out I was tuning into the Golden State Killer because the person in the house was connected to one of his other victims. So they didn't know if he came back and did something to this person or if it was totally unconnected or what was happening. And so so they said, can we take you, to the known crime scene from the Golden State Killer? And so then I ended up having to work on him. And then I could hear him whispering in my ear these really scary words. And so they said that they had a recording. Some guy had been calling up the victims, I guess, and speaking on their recorder. And so they made me listen to that. And then I
And
listened.
was he still alive at the time?
Yes, he was still alive. I ran out and I was like, I'm going home and I'm not working with you. Don't call me. Lose my number.
Really? After you heard, and did you work with them again, or it was just like alone?
I
Wow.
was so freaked out and so I don't think I slept for like 3 days. I was scared he was going to come to my house and find me. I was just so because I knew he was out there. I knew he was still alive and I knew he was close, or at least I knew he's in the state. And I was just so unnerved by him.
My
So,
gosh.
yeah.
Now, I don't remember. Did they found him, didn't they? They did
They
find him.
actually arrested him on my birthday, which turned out to be a wild thing, but they got him on my birthday about 4 years ago, I think.
And how long after you had that experience did they find him?
It was it was a long time. It was probably 5 years, something like that.
Have there been other times where you were afraid that someone would become aware that you were looking at them psychically or be aware that you were working on the case?
The first one, that very first one where I had the dream with the guy, his name is Michael, and I saw his face in one of my sessions, just like jumped up and staring back at me, which totally freaked me out. And then when I met him in person, when they took me over to his house during that wild first day, and I met him in person, he came right up to me and he said, "Oh, you're the psychic that's working on the case." Like,
Oh my God.
and I was like, you know that cartoon where like two people come together, but they're both like in a cartoon way, they're both running away. What was that?
Two of you.
Like, I don't know who was more scared, him or me. We were both like running away. Yeah. So
Funny.
I was really scared of him. I was really scared of him. Because he was out of jail while they were trying to find her and stuff. And I was so afraid he was going to come after me.
Wow. Yeah, that would be really scary. But yeah, people seem to think with psychics or remote viewers that like all we do is look at them and we know every single thing they're thinking and everything that they've done. And, they don't realize we're getting a lot less than that. And some
Yeah.
get nervous even when they have no reason to be nervous.
Yeah. Have you ever had people that like, I've had people that don't want to hug me because they think I'm going to like know all of their secrets or something if they touch me or something. I'm like, seriously?
Yeah, yeah. I'm always like, I have much more interesting things to be focused on than, trying to know everything about you. But I mean, it could happen, you touch them or something and usually I'll just like get a feeling like if they have pain in their body, I'll get pain in my body or
Yeah.
something. But it's not like I know all their deepest, darkest secrets at the moment.
Yeah.
I would not want to know those.
And detectives will do that, I've had detectives avoid me. I couldn't figure out why a certain detective was avoiding me so much. I just thought he didn't like me or something, I don't know. I just thought he didn't like me. And then it would turn out later that he was corrupt and then he would get arrested or whatever. So then I realized he just didn't want to be in the room with me because he was afraid I would know.
That's funny. That's a good indicator if someone's up to something, if they don't want to hang out with the psychic.
When they start avoiding you, you're like, because I just take it personally, what's wrong with me?
Yeah,
Why do you don't like me? Yeah.
yeah, totally. Well, in the few minutes we have left, is there any advice you would give to people that want to develop their psychic abilities and become a psychic detective? How could they go about doing that, or what are some tips that they absolutely need to know to move forward?
Yep. I always say get trained because you got to learn to control it so it doesn't control you. I am big on the clairs. I am really big on the clairs because I feel like no matter what kind of work you want to do, you have to hear it, see it, feel it, or know it. That's the only way you're going to get information. You're going to see it as a visual, you're going to hear it as a clairaudience, you're going to maybe get clairsentience, know it, or you're going to feel it. So that's the only way information comes in. And then it's just if you want to learn to be a psychic detective, I have all kinds of classes that I run all the time, but you have to learn not just the basics of how to get the information, but what kind of information is important, how to get detailed information, how to go after what you need at the time you need it, and all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I really like your classes. I took the first couple psychic detective ones a long time ago, and they were really fun and helpful because you had so many innovative exercises that people could.
We still try to, I still try to, I'm still trying to come up with fun ways to practice all the time.
Yeah, they were very creative. But yeah, and do you find that even though people will come and say, oh, well, I'm not clairvoyant, like I can feel, but I can't see, that with practice that they will develop that clear, or vice versa, one of the other ones, if they just are in enough situations where they get to practice or learn how to do that?
Definitely. I think, people just, I always think of it as going to the gym. If you go and you practice and you work out at the gym, your whole body's going to benefit eventually. You
Yeah.
know, that's how I think of it.
Yeah. Well, and that's a good point, because whether you're just exercising or you're learning techniques and approaches, it does seem almost like it is a muscle that, like on a physiological level, like you just have to kind of flex it enough and changes start to happen. And it's kind of hard to talk about, because it's not maybe quite physical, but metaphysical, with the physical underline, that there does seem to be changes in your body and your mind and your brain from just doing it. But then there's techniques that people can do, like, visually. I teach a lot of clairvoyant development, and I have a lot of people who say, yeah, I'm not visual, but they never like practiced, like seeing things on a screen, or, looking at like symbols, or just practicing like
I have a great tip for that. I have a great tip for people that say that to me.
what
'Cause
do you,
people say it all the time, and I'm always like, do you daydream? And they go, yeah. And I said, well, if you daydream, then you can see stuff. So I always say, especially mediums, it depends on what the person wants to do, but I start off easy. And you actually taught me, this was in your book, the rose. So practicing with the white rose and then turning it a different color and turning it a different color and then letting it turn a color. I do that, and then sometimes I'll just have somebody say a word to me, like chair, and then I'll have them conjure up a chair in their mind's eye. Like, wait until you conjure up a chair in your mind's eye, and then I'll say something like tiger. Wait for them to just conjure up a tiger. And then we move on to like harder stuff like people. My students laugh about it all the time because I always say Betty White. Everybody can see Betty White's face in their mind. Everybody.
yeah. And that's true. Like, people, memory is all about, at least having like a flash of, oh, like, where was I the other day? I was at the beach. So I'm seeing a little bit of the sand and, a little bit of the driftwood. And yeah, I think a lot of times it's just people's expectations of how that they think they're supposed to see something in Technicolor, and it's supposed to just be an image that stays there and they can see the whole thing. And that's not how our visualization typically works ever. But yeah, like see a tiger with black stripes, or see the tiger opening his mouth to take a bite out of you. Like, sometimes just seeing the movement or the action is like easier to visualize, and anyone can do that.
I think that's what it is. I think it's that people have this crazy expectation that they're going to see. And I blame TV for some of that, was that they see it on TV and they think that that's the way it works. And I'm
They
like,
give the flashback and it's the whole
right.
scene.
They see the whole thing. And I'm like, no, that's not how it works. But it's not a clear, crisp, vibrant visual. It's almost superimposed. For me, it's always superimposed over something I'm looking at.
Yeah, there's so many different ways our visuals can show up, and it changes depending on what the task is, and there's so many different variables that can change it up from time to time. So
But I
yeah.
think it's the consistency. I've just noticed myself that no matter what somebody's practicing or working on, it's the consistency that seems to really matter, because I can watch them over time and it's like, whoa, from a year ago to where you are now, it's like profoundly different, but it's because of the consistent practice all the time.
Yeah. And that's where I think what really sets so many people apart is not even just the raw ability, but just their sense of discipline, where they're willing to just keep working no matter what happens, no matter the successes or the failures, like they just keep practicing. And so many just, they just have other things they'd rather do, or their anxiety gets the best of them, or they just give up way too fast, especially when it comes to, there's a lot of people that are intuitives that, can do well, like giving people readings, but they're like this remote viewing stuff of having to write everything down and draw and get more and more details. Like it's just too much work. It is a lot of work.
It is a lot of work, but it's worth it, depending on what you're using it for. Like for me, it's totally worth it.
You're saving lives sometimes, and I mean, dealing with the most important things to people, helping them find their loved ones. And yeah,
and I'd rather do it on paper than do it on foot. I'd rather spend the time doing it on paper than being out there trampling around in the woods.
yeah,
So, but yeah, I know there's a lot of people that like to learn about it and read about it, but when it comes down to the doing it and the daily practice and all of that, a lot of people, just don't have it. I've also noticed that a lot of people, especially in my field, like there's a lot of people that are psychically able to do it. They have a lot of talent and they could do it, but they don't have the mind frame or the emotional makeup to be able to do this work. So it's not for everybody, even if they're really, really talented. Some people just cannot handle the content. It's just not for them.
yeah, yeah, that totally makes sense. And yeah, there's a lot of emotions and insecurities and frustrations and all sorts of things that you have to like keep plowing through.
Yep.
And
Yep.
it is, I think that's why, a lot of remote viewers, like they end up doing less sessions. They end up talking about remote viewing more than doing it. And,
Mhm.
probably that at times, I look at it
I know.
like,
I feel that way too sometimes. And I'm like, oh, it feels good to sit down and do a session. Yeah.
yeah, and this is what's really maybe needed more than just the talking or writing about it or researching it. Yeah. So I'm always going back and forth about, what would be better to spend time on. And sometimes it's an excuse to not. I'll write about remote viewing or study it rather than just doing it
Yeah.
every day.
Yeah. Do you do that? It's so weird because I love remote viewing. I really do. But I will do anything in the world to not sit down and do a session. Like I'll clean out the closet or pull weeds or whatever to
Yeah.
not have to start a session. And then when I get into it, I love doing it. It's just for some reason I don't know.
It's the transition phase from, okay, I'm in my everyday life. I'm like, I have my thoughts, like in just about anything else, you're washing the dishes, you're doing other things. You're like with yourself and your thoughts. But when it's time to go into a session, you're having to put that all aside no matter what's been going on. And in a sense, not that you're not at all aware of yourself, but like everything in your own life or maybe your ego stuff, all of that has to be put aside for a while. And I think that's why it's really hard to make that transition and want to go into it. And then there's also all the fear of like, oh, well, what if I am not going to do a good session or something? I think that is there even for those of us who know we've had a lot of examples of success.
There's a lot of resistance to sitting down and like you said, having to put everything aside and get focused and be dedicated to that. But the fear of failure and the fear of as long as I've been doing this, I still have that feeling every time I sit down to do a session. I still feel like that every single time. I am the most insecure viewer out there.
I'm glad to hear that for my own sake, not for your sake, but I'm like that too. And, my students will be like, how do I get over it? And it's like, I haven't been able to get over it. I just deal with it, do it anyway. And once you're in it, like, it's very cool what happens. That subsides while you're doing it. most of the time once you really get into it. And that's when you almost know, like, okay, I really am in the right mode because it's now gone.
Right.
Short period of time at least. But yeah, it's a tough one for
Yeah.
sure.
And I guess in a way, maybe that's a good thing because it keeps us humble. But, for me, every time I talk to a new detective I've never talked to, I'm super nervous. Every time I have to turn in my session, I'm just like so nervous about it. So
Well,
I don't think it goes away, maybe.
yeah. Well, and it might just be like we're more introverts in some way, or just, for someone that's just like totally outgoing and not like even anxious around meeting new people at all, like they may not quite have that, but then they have other insecurities too. So I don't know. It really
Well,
is.
we're all afraid of being wrong. We're all afraid of being wrong. That's what it is. That's what it is. So, yeah.
Yeah, and you know that occasionally you can be, and then you don't want people to yell at you and be mad, and we're afraid of that too. So it's rough, but it's good to know we're not alone, and we can still be effective and help
Yeah.
people.
Yeah. Because especially in my work, it's just like my worst nightmare is to get something wrong or, get dead or alive wrong. Like, I do not want to get dead or alive wrong. It's just like,
Yeah, that would there's just too many implications. And then also, even I think even when you get over some anxiety or nervousness, then you get to this level. It's like, okay, here we're doing this interview. There's going to be lots of people watching. The more you're in the public eye, it feels even scarier to do a session because, yeah, like what if I flop here and then it's going to be broadcasted to the world like, oh, she said he was dead, but he's really alive and she sucks. And like that gets out there. And so it seems like even once you get comfortable with an area, the stakes get higher and higher, the more successful you are. And then you're cycling through that, like, all the games you play in your mind with, like, this session matters the most. And if I fail, then, it's the end of the world. It's, yeah. And
yeah,
and I think that's why some viewers, would much rather do viewing, but do it like within a team where they have a project manager. No one ever knows who they are because the project manager is helping to hide their identity, but they're getting to do that work. And
yeah,
they're not choosing to work solo in the way that we, often do. And there's a lot to say for that. And it's great for people to know that that is an option, that they can do this with anonymity and, find
yeah,
someone to work with in that capacity.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I appreciate that when I have that opportunity too, just to be anonymous and in the background and doing the work. Because, I'm not on TV now. I haven't been on TV in a little bit, and I enjoy just doing the work, and nobody even knows what I'm working on, and I'm just doing the work. So I do enjoy that.
How would you deal with that when you had your show each week? Like, would you get really anxious?
That was so hard. Sensing murder was really hard because they would only give us, we only had 4 days each case. So, we would fly in and then do all of the prep stuff, hair, makeup, all the stuff, and get us ready. And then they'd take us to the police station, and we worked separately. So she went in the mornings and I went in the afternoon. So we'd have about 4 or 5 hours sitting in the police station, cold read, like we have nothing. We don't even know who the victim is. We don't know anything. And it's all live, right? Even you don't know what your detective's going to be like. You don't know anything. You didn't even know where we were going. They would just say you're going to fly to Denver and then somebody's going to pick you up and drive you somewhere. Like we never even knew where we were going. And then, so we'd only have like 5 hours that day. And then the next day they take us to the crime scene. And then we had like 5 hours to work on the crime scene. And then they would debrief us and then we go home. And then we had to like try to figure out how to clear it out so that we could go on to the next case.
That is so intense. And did you, like, would you know, like, oh, a murder happened or this happened, or would you not even know, like, what?
I kind of knew because it was called sensing murder, so I figured it was a murder. Most of the time, I figured it was safe to assume it was a murder, but I never knew. I didn't know if the victim, like, I didn't know if we had one victim or more than one victim, if they were male, female. I didn't know anything. And they would hand me an object, and then I'd have to describe the victim based on the object they gave me. And then once I finally did that well enough, then they would give me the photo, and then I could work from the photo.
Wow.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, I got good at jumping through those hoops because I wanted the photo.
Wow. And would you sometimes like draw the person before you saw the photo? Would you do drawing?
No, because I'm terrible at drawing people. Yeah, they don't laugh at me.
But you taught a drawing class along with one of
With
your
Chris
friends.
Barber, who was an artist. Yeah, yeah,
That was a very helpful class. Together, you offered it through the International Remote Viewing Association's conference. And that was a class where I learned that you shouldn't draw the face before you know what the shape is. Like there's a tendency to just draw a circle of a head, but then you're locking yourself into the
yeah.
shape of the face, which can be very important in describing someone. So that class was really helpful.
Because I used to do that too. I would draw an egg, basically, and then try to fit the fit the features inside there. Just learning that one little thing. So it's funny, your timing is really good because I have a student in my class. Her name's Anna, and she's an incredible artist. She's really, really good. She's got all of the artist training and stuff, but she's a really good intuitive. I'm a really talented intuitive. So I just asked her a couple days ago. I was like, "Hey, would you teach a class on, drawing faces?" So we're actually trying to set that up for June. So that's going to be good.
Wow, that'll be great. And if she ever wanted to teach a class through IRVA, our education department is looking for some intuitive artists to teach some classes too. So that would be cool too. But I'd love to take that class in June. So I'll look on your website for it.
I'm very excited because I don't think we've done it since I did that class with Chris Barber.
That class really, I mean, it was only like what, an hour or so, but it really inspired me to always be trying to provide a sketch of like the perpetrator or victim. And I hadn't really done that before that class. And something else I wanted to ask you if this happens to you. I'll get like flashes of famous people that look close to the perpetrator or missing person, and then I'll include that because that's easier drawing. Do you have that as well?
Yeah, yeah. It's almost like they have to show me, an example to get it. So a lot of times I'll see a celebrity or somebody I know, you know.
I'm
I'll
sure
be
they
like, I'm pretty
appreciate it
sure it's not them, but it looks like them.
that you
Yeah.
send their picture to the police
Send their
department.
picture in. It looks like this guy.
I'm sure they appreciate that. Yeah, I was doing a target for someone a few weeks ago and had an image of Pee Wee Herman. So I was like, well, I'll just put a picture of Pee Wee Herman in there. I didn't get feedback on it though, so we'll
Yeah.
see.
Yeah, we're playing with AI right now. With Cindy Miller, we've been playing with AI a little bit of if you take a sketch, and I had Anna just do it. It's really creepy, her sketch. You do the sketch first, and then you can put it in Chat GPT and ask for a photorealistic sketch, and then it'll turn it into a more realistic sketch.
Wow, that's really cool. And are you using ChatGPT for that? Wow.
She could do it with anything like a church. So say I draw, a lopsided church or something. Um, and then and I can't really make out all the details necessarily. I'm trying, but then I can feed that into chat and it'll clean it up and turn it into a, and then at least I can look at it and go, this part's not right, or this part's not right, and fix it.
Yeah. Oh, that's really cool. So there's hope for people
There's
that,
hope for those of us who struggle with the art part.
yeah. And I know probably like Paul Smith, who teaches drawing. I took his class. He would probably say, well, if you do that, then it might fill in details that really aren't there, that like,
Mm-hmm.
but it's just filling them in. But which is true. You have to be careful about that. But like you say, you can look at it and then tell what's not quite
What's
right.
not right. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a trade-off.
Yeah. I remember taking Paul's class and, he would just, one of the, he'd say, draw a gun, draw a water tank, draw a train, draw a horse. So I had some pretty funny pictures.
Yeah. Well, his class was helpful because it just, for again, those of us that aren't artists or haven't had training, he would show just putting in a little bit of shading can really help your drawing like look a lot better. Taking the time to draw some perspective can help.
Yes.
Like instead of a square, make it a cube at least. And it's not that hard to do. It just takes a little bit of like stopping and saying, okay, I need to put a little more effort into my drawing.
Yes.
And, maybe I don't know how much it helps with the intuitive part, but people definitely will take sessions more seriously if the artwork looks better.
Yeah, because I used to draw everything from top down. So I drew everything from a bird's eye view a lot of times. And so the perspective was really crazy. So I
Yeah.
finally learned to stop drawing everything from a bird's eye view because it's
It's
not
funny
helpful.
as if you're up looking down. Yeah, I used to show my spouse my remote viewing sessions, and sometimes, like, I thought they were really impressive, and he would just be like, whatever. And I thought it was like, oh, well, because he just, isn't too into psychic stuff. But one day I showed him a session from a viewer who was an artist. And I don't know if you knew Paul Hennessy. He was a longtime remote viewer. He's passed, but he would give such detail in his work. And I showed his session to Danny, and Danny was like, why don't you do this? Like, you need to start doing your sessions like this. And I was like, well, Paul's an artist and I'm not. That's
Yeah.
why I'm not doing it like that. But, I did start to try to put some more effort, and just through taking a couple of those classes, it helped. And I really believe that if people really want to do this work, it's very useful, like to take art classes and things like that.
Especially in my work, because if I'm trying to describe something to a searcher, I'll have if I were to say to them, I see a red brick building, or even if I said I see a brick building and it's got, pitched roof that's like this, and I'll think I'm being really clear in my description. They would go out and take pictures of buildings they think I'm describing and send me the pictures, and I'm like, that's not even, what is that? That's not even close to what I saw. So just a basic sketch to show what it is, at least the shape and what you actually saw, will, save a lot of time and effort because their brain is going to recall their own memories and their own subconscious stuff and is going to pull up what they think you're saying. So I've learned to just try to put it on paper as best I can.
Yeah, I was a judge on a project where there was this one psychic. She hadn't been trained in remote viewing, so she didn't know to sketch anything. And she had these long descriptions of shapes, like all kinds of shapes. And I was like, what the heck? And it was
What
like,
is this?
yeah, and I had to like try to visualize it myself. And I realized, well, this is what happens if the viewer doesn't provide the sketch, that now like I'm having to revisualize it, take the written word, revisualize it, judge what is in my head to the written word, and do these extra steps that would be totally eliminated if it was just on the paper. And people can learn, definitely. A lot of psychics like don't even realize that they need to be putting things down on paper so they can learn. But yeah, we can all improve at it for sure. It just,
Well, it helps too with the process, It's like I think of Tyler Henry. I love watching Tyler Henry work, because when he's first sits down and he's nervous and he's trying to get going, and I can relate to that when the cameras are on you and you've got people and you're just like sketching, doodling, just frees your mind up to start getting images. Like for me, that helps me so much just to start sketching and doodling a little bit, and it allows me to just check out and let the stuff come in a little bit.
yeah, it's putting you in the right place in your brain to access the intuitive information. As soon as you start sketching, you're getting out of the logic. I found that, and also, when I have students and I can tell this would be more for those like doing readings on people, but I can tell they're starting to like analyze things and they're just giving advice, then I'll tell them to go into a visual, that they're not necessarily having paper there because they're just like speaking, but I'll tell them like to start visualizing like the flower or trying to look at the person's field or colors around. And as soon as they start to go into visualizing, they get back into the intuitive place and stop analyzing. So it's like both when you're visualizing and when you're sketching, it's a lot harder to be analyzing. You're pulled out of that part of your brain.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's pretty useful.
Because that part of the brain is very active for some of us.
Yeah, very. Well, gosh, I know we could go on for
We
hours.
could go on forever, I know.
At some point, we're going to have to
Yeah.
go to sleep or get started on all those stacks of remote viewing sessions that are waiting for us. Yeah. So,
Oh, this is super fun.
yeah, thank you so much. And I know I'll be seeing you in October at the IRVA conference, and we'll encourage people to also check out your website. We'll have all that information in the video description.
Perfect.
So, yeah, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Yeah, it was super fun. And yeah, we'll have fun when we're out there in the desert.
Yeah, for sure. All
Okay.
right. You
All
take
right.
care.
We'll
Bye.
see you later.
Book 3 in the new Thinking Aloud dialogue series is UFOs and UAP, Are We Really Alone? Now available on Amazon.
New Thinking Aloud is presented by the California Institute for Human Science, a fully accredited university offering distant learning graduate degrees that focus on mind, body, and spirit. The topics that we cover here. We are particularly excited to announce new degrees emphasizing parapsychology and the paranormal. Visit their website at cihs.edu. You can now download all 8 copies of the New Thinking Aloud magazine for free, or order beautiful printed copies. Go to newthinkingaloud.org.